Hey, think you know which way it's going to go? Make your bet at Sports Interaction. Whatever your sport, Sports Interaction has you covered pregame. Live betting on all major sports, and of course, prop bets. Who doesn't love those? Want to bet? Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. 19 plus. Please play responsibly. Nailing the Apex with Tim Hauraney on SDPN, and this is sort of episode 2 of our Drive to Survive reaction sort of series, and we're going to react to every single episode and kind of go through it. This episode 2 was really the Mercedes episode. It starts with Toto and Susie Wolff at Harvard. They've won the drivers' championship. They've won the team championship, lost the drivers' championship. You know, Toto finishes that 4th season off by saying, "There's a target on everyone's back," like that. You guys remember that? And then you got a new driver too.
Funny thing about that, you saw he was wearing that black turtleneck.
Yes.
And okay, so that's the day. I want to say, 2022, I hate going back to 2022, 2021.
Brutal.
So I can't remember how many days it was that they, Mercedes came out and actually had a press conference because they didn't really say anything after that race, and Lewis didn't say anything until next season.
Yep.
So Toto was kind of like the voice of all that. And I remember I got invited to a press conference, with Toto, and it's kind of like for us over here in Canada, it was probably about 5 a.m. I had to I pulled it up and got my questions ready, and then all of a sudden Toto shows up, and there's this gunmetal background behind him, and he's got the black turtleneck on, and I was like, "Whoa, this is serious."
Yeah, means business.
He's upset.
Yeah. So I actually think that was the exact same day that he did that press conference, and then I also think he did that one right after, because when I look at the clothing, I'm like, very similar. So I was. Yeah, just
interesting
story.
Very well. He's usually wearing the Tommy Hilfiger button-up shirt, right? So you can tell when it's not.
He's a well-dressed man.
He sure is.
Oh, yeah.
He sure is. Now, I guess what kind of pressure is Mercedes on at the beginning of that season? You could tell that in Harvard or whatever he really wants to win, but what kind of pressure are they under bringing in a new driver and hoping to get Lewis an 8th world title, which they ultimately didn't get?
Quite a bit. I mean, you have to understand that you're going through this big regulation change. You just came off of an emotional 2021 championship, and you have to make sure that you nail the regulation so you can go back and compete against your rival and this time beat them. And so they go to testing in Spain, and they had one iteration of the W13. And then I remember waking up in 2022 on the eve of the Bahrain Grand Prix weekend and seeing pictures of this W13 now with these different side pods, and the car looked totally different. And I was like, whoa, what is that? And I'm like, they've either got something that's just going to kick everyone's butt, or they've got something that's a mess.
Right.
And turns out
it was a mess.
Yeah.
But at the time when you see it, I don't know if you guys remember, it was I want to say it was either 2020 or 2021 when they brought DAS on board, the DAS system where the driver pulls the steering wheel a bit.
Oh yeah.
The camera of the wheel or whatever. That broke the racing internet that day that video surfaced on preseason testing when they saw Lewis Hamilton just pulling back on the wheels a bit and the tires going.
Yeah,
everyone's just like, whoa. So it's like one of those things where it's like, whoa, look at this car that got something, right? So that was, I just remember that a lot.
And the porpoising was the main storyline of that car, right? It's the bouncing that they couldn't solve, but everybody else found a way to solve. And that's what was kind of at the crux of the issue. But it just wasn't a fast car at any point. And they made big changes coming out of Silverstone or into Silverstone, but it never really caught up all season. And I don't know when we're going to get to the big moment for
that's the back half of this episode, so that's 5 minutes from now, because that I'm saving half this episode for the team principal meeting,
because that might be my favorite moment in the entire series this season.
We're just warming up to that right now. I guess the first thing is a minor storyline in this is George Russell and his integration into the Mercedes team. Obviously, he's a Mercedes driver, and he is a very unique personality. Lewis Hamilton, a very unique and very mature personality. but both extraordinarily competitive. And there was going to be a lot of questions about would they get along.
George lacks a little personality.
You think?
He's a little hoity-toity.
Wow. He is British rich guy.
And he comes across that way. But I wish he would show any semblance of like normal guy.
He is.
Hoity-toity is my best word to describe George Russell.
I think that one of the great things about George, though, is that he just owns who he is. You know what I mean? Like, he just embraces
Seems very type A.
He can't be anybody but George, is the thing.
I remember I sat down and did a one-on-one with him back in 2019, and I just remember George like telling me some of the stories about how he got into Williams. Like, he put together this PowerPoint presentation that he took into Claire Williams. Was like, look, Claire, this is why I deserve and need to be in your car, and this is what I'm going to bring, and the percentages I'm going to bring. Performance. Yeah, extremely young. I don't know what he was, probably like maybe 19 or 20 years old, but going into Claire Williams' office and like telling her why you need to be in the car, and then putting on a PDF like PowerPoint presentation is. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
No, it sounds like George Russell.
Yeah, it's I respect that. I respect that. If I thought that was going to give me a chance of getting into an F1 car, yeah, you bet I'm going to do it.
There are certain personalities that would jump into a team like that and go, man, I hope Lewis Hamilton will be open to mentoring me. George doesn't seem like the kind of guy who needs that.
No, he went in there and he felt like he belonged from the beginning.
Right.
Like, this is where I should be.
So how did that work? What's the dynamic between those two?
So they actually they work quite well together. Both of them do. I caught up with every year. I talk to George quite like frequently through press conferences and interviews and stuff. And we were at the Canadian Grand Prix, and I sat down with him and I was kind of just saying like, hey, like, you were at Williams. And now you are working with a 7-time Formula One world champion, one of the greatest drivers of all time. I'm like, what is that like? And he's like, I'm extremely privileged. He's like, this is an incredible opportunity. Like, learning from Lewis, who was his hero as a kid, is like...
I love the pictures of them together when Lewis is at McLaren.
Yeah.
George's like there with his book. Like,
little guy. Looks exactly the same.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is where this whole... thing with like F1 and driver rivalries, it's kind of like coming into 2023, George is coming off a great season in a car that's not very good, and Lewis isn't. And how is Lewis going to handle working with George for a second season if George is outperforming him again? And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but we've seen in the past, Lewis has never always gotten along with his teammates.
Well, notably Nico Rosberg.
Yes.
And Valtteri Bottas seems like a kind of guy who gets along.
But then again, there's that dynamic of like Valtteri was eventually kind of understood like driver number 2.
You have to be number
George
2.
Is not.
No, he's not going to accept. And we saw that
like
in this season, there isn't a Brazil episode for George. Like, there's no George wins episode in the entire season.
Great point, Jesse. I remember saying to my girlfriend, I'm like, they did George dirty. Right? They needed to show him get his first win.
And like, that would have illustrated the point that he did have a better season than Lewis. Lewis did take on some of the issues with the car. Like,
absolutely.
They did a lot of the testing with Lewis's car, and he took that on. So that's on him, I guess, if we want to give that to him, the courage to do that. But George did outperform him a lot.
Well, he's Mr. Reliable. Like the most top 5 finishes right off like the first 10 races,
and he won.
He won a race.
Won in Brazil.
So how did Lewis? Because you see that clip, and I remember actually watching that because that got a lot of play of Lewis almost being ready to like throw in the towel. Race 7, race 8, something like that. Like, guys, and they're like, Lewis, keep pushing. He ends up in the points. Those points end up mattering in their race against Ferrari. It's why they were in it at the end. How close was he to retiring? And I hesitate to use the word fragile, but how kind of over it was Lewis to start last season?
I don't think we saw a 100%, Lewis Hamilton, because as a champion and as much as he's won, that has to be a huge setback when you have a poor car. You can't even compete for wins. You can barely compete
and you feel
for
like you were robbed the season before.
Right, and your teammate who's brand new to the team is
racing well.
Is racing, driving very well. I mean, that's got to like take a little bit of the wind out of your sails. But I think for Lewis as a whole, it was tough. Like, it was really hard. I mean, I'm trying to think, like, he's never had a season where he's not won. That's the first time.
Yeah, it was first year.
That's
for him, it seems like
he's been in Formula One for a long time.
If he's not competing for the absolute top, then why is he doing it? You know, it feels like when he's out there and he's not competitive to win the race, he seems frustrated because that's the only thing he needs to be doing at this point.
I think like one of the important things for Lewis that season was there were signs of progress, that the car was getting better. And I think mentally that helps a lot as an athlete, where you actually start to see that progress happening and you kind of get those good vibes starting to come back, and then that translate into more positivity, which then you can put it into your work, which then translates, and it's just like this big circle, and it's a good one. And I think for Lewis that needed to happen, and I think it probably didn't until I want to say maybe race 9 or 10, maybe after the Canadian Grand Prix, because they were dealing with so much porpoising issues and stuff like that, and it was just at that point the team was just looking in the mirror like, we don't even know what to do with this thing at this point. So I think for Lewis, that was a big thing of seeing the progress, and then you start to see the performances, right? I mean, I think Lewis ended up out qualifying George at the end of the season.
Yeah,
the driver
it kind of flipped by the end of it.
Exactly.
Lewis pulled ahead of George, but like I think Lewis sticks around for number 8. Like, I think he does this as long as he can to try and get as many cracks as he can.
Look at Fernando
at number 8. You know,
I think like good point. I think if you look at it, what is he? He's around 38. I think with this season, it's very important for Mercedes, because if you don't see any signs of progress and you haven't clawed back a ton of performance with this car philosophy that you're still kind of sticking with, it really only lasts about 2 years, car philosophies, and then you got to start from ground zero again, and then you have another regulation change in 2026.
Yeah, huge one, right? Yeah.
And it's kind of like, okay, if you're Lewis Hamilton, what do you do? Because essentially it's kind of like, okay, well, I can't stick around here for like 3 more years, just fighting for top 5s. I mean, I have to I got to win. I got to get this 8th world championship. And I think if 2023, there's a lot of progress that happens and they actually start fighting for victories, which I think they will later on in the season, then I could see him battling for an 8th world title in 2024.
Yeah. To do the comparison to the other sports, Lewis Hamilton doesn't care about draft picks. That doesn't help him right now at all. Every year has to be about winning a championship or nothing.
Yeah. No, 100%.
Now, the biggest scene from this episode is the team principal meeting called by, FIA boss Stefano Domenicali. And the big scene is Toto Wolff saying to all the team principals, something needs to be done about this porpoising. I'm paraphrasing. And if somebody gets hurt, I'm coming after all of you. And then Christian says, hey, if you got a problem with your car, fix your fucking car. So that is the two Titans, Rock'em Sock'em robots, head to head. What do you make of something like that? And what do you know about that particular team principal meeting?
So this is coming off the back of Baku, so the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, where there was a ton of porpoising, and then we saw those shots of Lewis having trouble getting out of the car.
The old man shots out of the car where his back is killing him.
Exactly. And I remember the next race up was Canada, and it was immediately following. And the drivers in particular, Mercedes drivers, they did put a lot of pressure on the FIA, and so did Mercedes about hey, safety of the driver, this porpoising issue, and whatever. But a lot of the other teams had solved it. For Mercedes, I think it had a lot to do with where they had the ride height of the car, where if the ride height was just a little bit higher, they probably wouldn't suffer so much porpoising, but then they wouldn't have the performance. If they had the ride height really low, which they did for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, that's where they got the most amount of porpoising. So for them, it was trying to understand, where can we run this car where we get great performance and we don't get so much porpoising and kill our drivers. They were worried about the driver's health. Full stop. And so going to the FIA and just saying hey, we need you guys to take a look at this. What can we do? And blah, 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 blah. And then by the time we got to Canadian Grand Prix, there was there was this release I had gotten from the FIA, like we all did, and it had to do with I think it was a technical directive. I can't remember what the number of it was, but it had to do with raising of the ride height of the cars, which we see this season, and we saw a little bit of it after summer break last season, and that was a big problem with like the team personnel, team principals, because it's like, well, hey, we figured it out. Yep. You guys haven't. This is your like this
it's problem. A you problem.
Mm-hmm.
You know, team principals are right. You know, they've got a point, and that's what led to this exchange that happened during this team principal meeting, which I wasn't too far from, and we saw like a little glimpse of what it actually
Christian makes
was.
reference. Is this for the cameras or is this for...
I was shocked that the cameras were in the room for that.
Oh yeah, me too.
Like, it was unbelievable that we were 100%. Sitting there watching this meeting.
Because they came out of that, and I remember speaking with, you know, a representative for one of the teams, and they were just like, hey, like the cameras for like Netflix were in there, and it got really spicy.
Oh,
I don't think it was supposed to be like that.
No, and as I mentioned in our previous episode, for episode 1, Gunther Steiner, the protagonist of the series, had to start off that meeting with jokes about being in class and poking fun, and he wouldn't keep shut when the FIA boss is trying to get the meeting started.
Like,
Gunther's sitting there, and he had to shush him. Protagonist of the series every time.
So what did we miss from that meeting? What else when it was it did it get it just was probably heated.
A lot of yelling, I think. Mm-hmm. I think we probably missed a lot of that, is what I think.
What I think is fascinating too is sort of the hierarchy of team principals.
Yep.
Because you notice who's talking and who's not. You got Mattia, who's like, I'm not going to say, and Mattia comes up a little bit later when they talk about the cap overage, which we can talk about in that episode. But Mattia's saying a little bit, and he's a little bit like, whoa, why are you coming after me? Christian, of course, is going to say something. Toto, of course, is going to say something. Zach Brown's involved. But you see, and Gunther obviously gets shushed at the beginning. But Fred, Gunther, Franz, who's the Williams boss again?
At the time, it was Jos
Capito. Those guys are saying nothing. Mm-hmm. It's because it seems like there's a top 5 and there's a bottom 5.
And they're just kind of like, well, our fight's not with them.
Yeah.
So why do we need
why
to need to get involved in this conversation? I mean, I think at the end of the day, if it comes down to the TD, like I had mentioned, I think there was probably more team principals getting involved in that conversation for sure, because it would have actually affect them as well, right? Mm-hmm. And you would have to think they're looking out for the best interests of their teams. So I don't necessarily, like, we didn't see like all of that.
Yeah, we saw the
meeting
Titan
and
part,
exchange.
though.
We saw, from my understanding, it was like, and I believe it's written somewhere, like it was like we saw like bare minimum of what it actually was. Like apparently, it was
is that something that can split the grid? Because there's 3 cars using Ferrari parts. There's 4, I think 3 or 4 using Mercedes parts. Are they on like? Is there like an allyship there, or is it just that's a transactional relationship?
There is a little bit of an allyship, but I think at the end of the day, you have to do what's best for your team, right? And I think it depends on. These team principals can vote on things, can vote rules in, vote rules out, or vote other little things that happen within Formula One. And I don't know, maybe if you're a team principal, this is what I would do. If I'm a team principal and I own 2 teams, I'm going down to the other team, being like, hey, make sure you put your vote on this because that's what we're doing. That's what I would do if I'm a team principal, for sure.
Yeah, I wonder if Toto regrets that moment. Getting into that screaming match on camera and
with everybody,
with
everybody on the grid,
and even like when he gets a little petty, where he's like, "I printed out what Checo said," and he's like, "I haven't printed out," Like, I wonder if he regrets that being out there, or if he owns that moment.
That's a great question. I don't know. Like, Toto's pretty smart, and he's really he's well spoken. So if he's gonna say something, and if it's in the heat of the moment, I mean, I'm sure he's probably thinking about the words that are coming out of his mouth, type deal. I mean, I think he may have gotten in a bit of hot water. I think last season, what was it, Saudi Arabia maybe? I can't remember which race it was. It had to do with was it Saudi Arabia or was it Singapore? I think it was a deal with the cost cap breach or whatever, and I'm sure we can get into that in the later episodes because I know we're going episode by episode. But Yeah, I mean, usually Toto's pretty good with.
Yeah, it's like he sort of goes high, Christian for sure will go low.
Yeah.
And that's you. So it was interesting to see those roles sort of reverse.
And Christian going low. This I believe it's in this episode where Christian is talking about Mercedes to the camera and he laughs. Do you remember that cackle he gives?
Loves it.
And you can see him visibly holding in the laugh, trying not to get out there. But he's like, and Mercedes, they're struggling this year, and they've never been in that point. And he gives off this big kind of evil cackle, and he relished. I think he relished last year and how that went for the team.
He's great television, though. Right?
Oh yeah,
like
absolutely.
Appointment viewing, I think.
Absolutely, and obviously this season is too. So that is episode 2. We will be back with episode 3 probably tomorrow. Posted it day by day. Drive to Survive reaction on with Tim Hauraney, newly of SDPN.